Hi everyone. My name is Emma, and for this assignment, I decided to do option two. And so I'm just going to be going over my notes with you guys. Um, and the chapter that I chose to focus on specifically was chapter five. So, yeah, just from the book and from the lectures, chapter five was about you're starting to get down to more like how you do these research methods, right? You're starting to look at how we organize data, reliability versus validity, all those basic things, numerals and numbers. Yeah, so those are kind of the core key things that I'm going to be going over and looking at because I thought they were really interesting. Um, yeah, so let's get started with the notes. So I think the first thing that was really interesting to me that the chapter decided to open with that was actually helpful was the textbook talks about how research like this, like categorizing research, is kind of intuitive, right? As humans, our brains want to organize things. We want to take information and organize it in a way that we can understand it. And so putting data and things into categories and organizing it is just like what we naturally want to do. And so with our research, we should be trying to, put it in, organize it in the best possible way for other people to understand. And that's intuitive, and that's just naturally what we want to do. So the first thing that the textbook talks about is numbers versus numerals. And I thought it was interesting because I've never personally made the distinction between numbers and numerals. I've just always like used the terms like interchangeably. Obviously, I use numbers more, but I've never like been like, oh, there's a difference. So I liked that it made that distinction. So numerals is a number that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't assign value to anything. So the example that I think of is I'm a football fan. I love to watch the NFL. And my favorite football player is Peyton Manning. He's retired. He's not playing anymore, but that's my favorite football player. His number is number 18. The 18 on his jersey doesn't mean he's the 18th player, the 18th best player, the 18th worst player, the 18th person to ever throw a touchdown. Like, the number doesn't mean anything. It's just a jersey number. And so that's how I like to think of it. Then you look at numbers, that is a number that actually assigns value to something. So I think age is like the simplest, best example. So I'm 20, but my husband, he's 22. So it's easy to assign like, oh, he is older than she is. He has been on the earth longer than I have. So yeah, numbers assign value to something, numerals don't. They're just a number. So I like how it made that distinction, and I like all the different examples that it used, so that way like I could like internalize that. Moving on. I always feel like I'm like out of breath. Okay, so moving on to the Noir. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I understand it, so I feel like that's more important, right? Noir is a acronym, and the different letters in the word stand for something that has to do with like categorizing data, and how do we look at that? So starting off with N. N stands for nominal. Nominal. I can't pronounce any of these words, but I understand them. So nominal is just basic categories. It's just sorting things out. The categories don't mean anything. You can't put one category over another. It's just a category. So you have like male and female. You can put people in those categories, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can put one category above another. This is helpful Well, it's hard to, so like it's helpful to sort things, and you can kind of get some information from that in terms of like surveys and that stuff. You can get like 70% of males agreed with this, whereas only 45% of females agreed with this. But besides that, like basic percentages and stuff, it's really hard to get anything else out of nominal data. Yeah, so that's the first one. O is ordinal. So ordinal is, it's categories like nominal, but the categories can be ordered. So my favorite example was freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. So you're in a category, but you can confidently say that a sophomore is higher than a freshman because sophomores have more credits. So that's helpful to like it just breaks down the categories a little bit more, and you can make a few more assumptions because the categories are like in order. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than the nominal measurement. And both the N and the O measurements are discrete, meaning that you have to fall in a category. You can't be between a freshman and a sophomore. You either have enough credits to be a sophomore or you're a freshman. So you have to fall in a category, which is good for some things, harder for others because you can't, you have to fall in a category. Next is the I, which is interval. Interval, I like to think of it as like the idea course evaluations that USU bombards your email with at the end of the semester. The questions are always like, did your professor teach to this standard? And you say, strongly disagree, strongly agree, anywhere in between that. So that's interval. It's a scale. You assume that each increment is the same distance apart, and people can land on any place on that scale. So it's just like more detailed. You can get better information when people can gauge themselves where they're at. Then R, the last one, is ratio. And I think the biggest difference between ratio and interval is that there's a true zero. So putting like the idea evaluations, you can't really find like a true zero. It just like wouldn't really make any sense. But I think the textbook, the example it used was like class attendance. Someone can not come to class at all, never come to class, that's zero. You can compare everything else to that person because they never came to class, which interval, you can't really like do that. Interval and ratio, the difference between those two and the first two is interval and ratio are continuous, meaning you don't have to fall in one category. It's a scale and you can place yourself anywhere on that scale. And so it's just like, it's helpful because you can be anywhere you want. And so it's just more detailed data. And then I think the biggest thing that stood out to me in lecture about all of this is that these measurements like build on each other. So N is at the bottom, R is at the top. And the farther up you go, the more sophisticated and stuff like your measurements can be, because like the better data that you're like gathering, which like different situations call for different things, but yeah, it's going up that scale. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was reliability versus validity. One of my minors is sociology. So have been in a couple sociology classes at USU, and I think the studies and stuff for sociology are similar to what we're studying here. And so we talk about reliability and validity a lot, and I've always gotten kind of confused by it. And so I really appreciated the textbook and the examples in lecture because they were super helpful to me. Reliability, thinking about that, if you think about a target, like in lecture, if you can shoot an arrow and hit the target in the same place every time, that means you're reliable because you're always hitting in the same place. The example that I gave in the textbook was like a watch. Your watch should read the same time every day. It should read 10 a.m. at 10 a.m. every day. And if it doesn't, that's going to be super frustrating because you're going to be either on time, but maybe you'll be super early or maybe you'll be super late. And that's obviously frustrating. So you want things to be reliable. So we want our data to be reliable. We want, that if we test it again with new people or different people observing, that we should get the same results every time. That's reliable. Validity, if you think about that same target analogy, it's you're shooting, but you're not even hitting the target. It doesn't matter if you hit in the same place every time. If you're not hitting the target, you're not doing what you intended to do. So it's the same thing with our data. The questions that we come up with should measure what we want to measure. Because if they don't measure what we intend to measure, it's not going to matter how reliable it is because it's not what we wanted to do. So there's definitely a big difference between the two, but they're both really important in making sure that our studies are effective and can be used by other people, I guess, is a standard. Yeah, so those are the main things I got out of chapter 5. And yeah, I hope this helps.